So, what I want to talk about today is the newbie DM experience of building an encounter. Very often, newbie DMs will get out some graph paper, draw some shapes, make a bunch of boxes, lay out every trap, every enemy, every secret treasure room of the dungeon. And they want to make sure that you can fight with specific measurements in every area, which is mostly overkill, but it's also so rigid that it limits you. So, with the example of a trap or a locked door, we'll use a locked door. A lot of new DMs will lock a door so that the rogue in their group can open it. Because that's what, honestly, is what the Dungeon Master Guide tells you to do, is to give your players an opportunity to shine. I think this is a huge mistake, and you definitely shouldn't do that. So, when you lock a door for the rogue to open it, what happens when they fail the roll, or break their lockpick, or die before they get to the door and re-roll something else, is that the story comes to a halt, like a hard stop. And you have to fudge it. You have to unlock the door somehow. And it's very awkward, and it's kind of embarrassing, and it feels bad. So what I'm going to propose throughout this video is a different way to go about planning encounters. It's going to use a little bit of information from the previous story deck video. I talked about factions in that group in that video that have priorities. And their priorities are numbered and listed in such a way that you know what they value over what. So if money is the mercenaries' number one concern, you could just pay them and it'll solve your problems. If reputation is their number one concern, you might not be able to pay them, or it might cost a lot more to accomplish that. And the way we set it up in the last video makes it very easy to reason about that in real time. So if your players ask you, can we bribe this guy? You have an answer because you understand their priorities. If you ask, would this guy betray the king? You know because you've set up the priorities. And in the same video, we talked about giving all the major NPCs in the world something to do in between each game. So if you are going to the temple to try to retrieve an ancient relic key, there is some chance that when you give those NPCs randomized tasks to do, one of them will be going to the temple to get the key for their own goals based on their priorities. And so what you need to do is generate a list of units for that faction. So if it's the army, they might have, commander and scout and infantry and horse guy, right? And you'll do stats for each of those so that you can use them intelligently for this step, the encounter step. Knowing that the army is operating at the temple when your players go there, and you have the stats ready for the units, you can just weave them in usefully. You can bring in reinforcements and understand how it's going to balance. You can give them certain tactics that they'll use anywhere they are. But in the temple, maybe there's no horse guys, right? But you'll have enough of a history and a solid through line thread to tie it all together in a meaningful and convincing way. So we're going to go to the screen now. I'm going to talk about encounters, but it's going to assume that you have factions. Those factions have patron NPCs. Those patron NPCs have priorities, and that you have done some stat blocks for the stats of units in that faction. There's a lot to assume, but it's what we're going to do so that we can talk through these examples. So let's go to the screen. Okay, so top left here is, top left here is kind of the standard way to set up an encounter, right? We'll say it's 4 army guys, and the circles are our players. So we've got the 2 in the middle are kind of tanky shield guys, and the outer ones are archers. The only possible outcome for this encounter is basically kill the 4 guys. And it's my contention that that is an awful design for an encounter pretty much always. The number one rule for designing good encounters, no fights to the death. There should always be something that you're fighting over, and if it's going to be a fight to the death, it needs to be compelling enough that you'll die for it, which is a pretty high bar, so this should be reserved for, like, honor duels from an important backstory NPC, or, like, endgame boss, like, you're going to die for something. You're not just going to die like a bitch to an orc in a cave. And a lot of DMs will be like, oh, you can just run away. But that's not satisfying, and it doesn't push the narrative forward. So if you're going to have a fight, it should be over something, and you should be able to win or lose without the narrative stopping. That's different than you usually think about, so I understand that it's going to be a little weird to talk about. If we go down here to the bottom left, this is the same encounter. 4 guys, 2 tankies, 2 archers, but it follows my rules. I'm not saying I'm the greatest DM ever, but, like, these are my thoughts, right? So the actual goal is to get through this doorway. And this doorway might be blocked by a portcullis, or it might be locked, or might need a strength check to, like, push it open, right? Something like that. Something that's going to take some time to accomplish, so that these archers, they're at the top of some stairs on either side. There's like a gatehouse, right? And then the tankies are at the bottom of the stairs, so you have to go past them to get to the archers. And so while you're trying to solve this door, the archers are going to be firing on you, and the tanks are going to hold position. So already you can see that this is now a tactical puzzle to solve. Same units involved, but now we have to think about it. Now we're at least engaging part of our minds. The ultimate goal is narrative engagement, but right now we're going to start at tactical engagement. So what this does is it gives your players more options. In the top left, our only option is to do enough damage to reduce all of the enemy's HPs to 0. Or to run away and then, I don't know, figure something else out. In this case, we have to get through this door. Our big strengthy fighter guy might move one of these units so that our rogue can run up the stairs. Our wizard might fly up the stairs and zap zap, right? Our rogue might do some climbing or some jumping. There might be a magic item that the party has, like a boots of jump. What you have to resist the urge to do is what I call locking the story door, which is what we talked about before with the rogue who needs to open the door and there's no key anywhere, but, like, the rogue died or doesn't pick locks or doesn't have a lockpick. You don't want to hard code any solutions for your puzzles or your encounters or anything like that. You shouldn't build this encounter and think, they should use this ability that they have to solve it. Don't do it. Don't even look at your character sheets. Don't even consider that you have a druid. Just build the encounter. Because here's the thing. Either they have exactly the right solution, or they don't. If they do, they get to shine. They get to do their cool thing and actually utilize the tools that they have. They feel fantastic. Turning into a bear, pushing this guy out of the way, guy runs up, like, it feels good. You have the jump boots. Oh, I'm doing my jump thing. Feels fantastic. If they don't, right, now it's more challenging. Now they have to work together to come up with a solution that you inherently didn't expect because you didn't think about it. You didn't spend any time planning this encounter past the tactical considerations. You roleplayed from the perspective of the faction, right? If this is some, like, zombies, right? Zombies are not going to do this encounter like this. They might use the same map. They might defend the same door. They're going to do it differently. And so it's easy for you to do because you're just role-playing the faction. And you're not trying to think of every solution. And you're not trying to hard code in this big climactic moment. You're just letting the players play, to experiment, to stretch the boundaries and push against them. So the actual goal of this encounter is to get through the door. There are a million ways that could happen. And your players are going to take it wherever they want to take it, and they're going to have a good time. So another thing to consider is that anything your enemies can use, your players should be able to turn to their advantage. In this top right example, we've got a guy with a ballista on a hill, and a bunch of little dudes in a ravine. Maybe there's an airship overhead. Maybe there's a dragon, whatever. The point is, that ballista is going to hassle the shit out of us. Unless we can take it and then use it. And then we're going to get a big bonus from having it. We're not going to get a little bonus. You're not going to tell us we got one shot and then it busted. No, you're going to let us use it. Because we put in the effort. Because we, the players, have communicated through our actions that we are interested in this corner of the world. And as a DM, you want us to be interested in any corner of the world. So help us be interested in that corner of the world. Let's say we cast fog, and then we run through, and then we take the ballista, and then we clear the fog. We're utilizing resources that we would otherwise just reserve. In the top left example, it's just HP pretty much all the time. You're just trying to kill things. So you're going to measure and mete out your abilities over the duration that you expect to do fights without a rest. In the top right example, you get to use fucking fog to do some stuff in combat. Like, it's way more interesting than top left. So the cool thing about top right, and I kind of went into this with the last example, but let's say it's zombies and not army. Nobody's using the ballista because zombies don't use ballistas. Or do they? They're going to fill the ravine. There's going to be twice as many. You have their stats ready because you've got the stat blocks for that faction, and you understand how the faction works, how they fight, what their tactics are like. What would they do on this map? Think of them as maps instead of like discrete encounters. Like, just think like this is a tool for telling the story that I'm telling, because that's what it is. It's a narrative tool. Fight me. Okay, so anything that the enemies can use, the players should be able to turn on them and feel awesome about. The last thing we're going to talk about is kind of like the climax of the whole thing. So you've got your NPCs, you've got your factions, you've got your random actions. They've come to the temple to get the key to advance their agenda, but so have the players. There is now an organic conflict over a thing. This faction might not hate us. We might have been friends with this faction. We might still be friendly with this faction. But we cannot resolve the situation that we both need this key. So we're going to fight over it. Now, if these are evil guys, there's a good chance we're just going to kill them all. If these are good guys, we might kill some of them and just have a good old-fashioned conflict. If these are mind-controlled peasants and we're trying to save as many innocent people as possible, we need the key to free their minds, we're not going to kill any of them. These are considerations that your players will have when they realize what the situation is. They have a conflict with another faction. They can't afford to let this key go. This is their big moment to use all of their resources to accomplish all of their goals and get out. What we're talking about is like 2 stone staircases leading up to a waterfall. And in the waterfall is this key in a magical bubble, and the waterfall is too fast for you to reach in. It's too fast for your weapons to break through. You've got to come up with some way to get this key out of the waterfall. And you have to do it before the other faction does it. In the same vein as the ballista, you might use more interesting utility spells here. You might use, Entangle to just hold them there while you think it through. You might, I don't know, freeze the waterfall and chisel it out. There's a lot that could happen here. But the important thing is that it's all 100% organic. It is the result of a well-built world, a lived-in world with real conflicts, with real motivations, where you just role-played the enemies and did what they would do. And the players will play off that in fantastic ways. I promise. Like, if you just role-play with your players, you're going to have a fantastic game. Just to recap my thoughts on building encounters, rule 1, no fights to the death. If it's going to be a fight to the death, it needs to be like dramatic story, narrative, like you killed my sister, let's duel sort of thing. Make it tactical. Don't just use flat terrain, empty rooms with 4 guys in them, 4 interchangeable guys that don't mean anything. Have them fight for something. Let players use their abilities to overcome things. Encourage them to use their abilities and not just roll the lowest cost damage they can to get through as many fights as possible. Let them take advantages from the enemy. Let them have advantages over the enemy that the enemy can take. You should have an obvious goal. when they enter the room, it should be clear what the task is. Even if that task itself is complicated or it's a puzzle or it takes some doing, it should be obvious that that is what we're fighting over. There should never be a question of motivation. Sometimes the motivation might be insufficient, right? We're going to fight over this key, but the players don't actually care that much about this key. Not enough to kill random peasants, right? So they might let it go. But that still advances the narrative for you, because when you go between games and you flip the next card for that NPC that got the key, they're going to do something with it. Their agenda has advanced. Their influence in the world has expanded. It advances the narrative, is really the thing I'm getting at. Everything you do in tabletop role-playing games, as the DM, should advance the narrative in some way. You never want the locked story door where you go to open it, your lockpick breaks, and now? We couldn't kill him, so we ran away, and then... But the key's on the other side of those guys. What now? The world freezes in place until we get that key. That's awful. Nobody's satisfied by that. Okay, so thanks for listening to my thoughts on encounters. You guys have a good day.